The gaming handheld scene has been overwhelming, I would say, for years now, because we are just seeing so many devices come out constantly. And now we're seeing pricing of these things get upwards of average price $800 to $1,000, which is kind of crazy if you really consider where a lot of it started from, or at least the interest in the AAA gaming on the go scene really began, which was, with the Switch came out in 2017, ton of interest, and then the Steam Deck came out years later, a lot of interest there online, and we've been off to the races since then with stuff coming out from companies you wouldn't even necessarily expect, okay? But there has always been this reserved seat for Sony to eventually come back to the handheld space. The Vita didn't sell well for them, but I think many of us who either have a Vita or had one and maybe got rid of it or something, like, you look back on that and you're like, man, that's actually a pretty good handheld with all the features they packed in and the styling. It still feels like a modern handheld now, like 14 years later or something. So when I start to hear more and more stuff about this this PlayStation Vita successor, I start getting a bit more excited. And then we had some leaked information get out there around just the creation, the manufacturing of this thing, and what we could see come out of this attempt from Sony going back to the handheld market. And it's actually looking pretty good. And the other thing about this is it could be coming sooner than even I was expecting, but let's take a look at that information here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, this info is coming from Moore's Law is Dead, and they have had their run-ins with Sony, which has actually added more and more credibility to some of the stuff they're getting. The PS5 Pro stuff seemed to get them into some trouble as Sony issue takedowns of their videos. So when you see that, you're like, okay, well, Sony's essentially confirming that they have some kind of in there, right? So then you start paying attention to them a bit more. And they did come back here with a ton of information around the PlayStation Canis, which is this PS6 sort of handheld, and then the PlayStation 6 itself, which we'll touch on that a bit more in the week coming up in Newswave. But as somebody who really enjoys the Vita still, like, it's an awesome system, by the way, to get and soft mod and hack and stuff. There's a lot of stuff with the community there. But I'm interested to see what Sony may want to do coming back to this space. So let's take a look. This is a slide that Moore's Law is Dead has in their video, which I will link that down below, as they covered a lot of stuff there, again, alongside of the PS6 handheld, the PlayStation 6 console itself. But I was going over some of this info, and okay, so at the top, the 3nm die, that makes sense. AMD is moving in that direction with the Zen 5 and Zen 6, and we get some info about the CPUs that would be in here, the cores being Zen 6C. So to me, that lines up. They say they can verify this in modern documents. It's important to note that some of the stuff is from like 2023, so things can change naturally in the background as they are developing, whether it's roadblocks they run into, which most of the time ends up being like cost. You got to cut costs somewhere to get within a certain threshold of the price you want to go to market with. So naturally, there's going to be some give and take there, especially we're about to see the potential release window for this thing, but it sounds like 4 to 5 years, from when some of the info was taken. Backwards compatibility to the PS5 and PS4 generations. No mention of PS3. It's still unfortunate that Sony has struggled so much with that PlayStation 3 generation, mostly because they still have some games that are just like Infamous. We've talked about that a lot. It's locked behind streaming. Streaming is not a good experience, and I'm not sure what Sony does when those server blade. They have really just like PS3s essentially in their server rooms that are keeping these things running, and it makes me wonder what happens when their specialized PS3 boards they have designed start to break down over time. What do you do? But at least PS5 and PS4, I can think of a ton of PS4 and PS5 games that would be awesome to have on the go and just see working on this system. Massive libraries, clearly. So like day one purchase, if you can figure out a way, and I say figure out because that's something else Sony needs to at least try to expand on. What do you do for the person who has a physical collection of these games? Because, well, as you see, it includes a micro SD slot, M2 SSD slot, haptic vibration, dual mics, touch, all of that seems pretty straightforward. No mention of what kind of storage medium they would use for games, which leads me to believe this thing it's going to be all digital. I don't think Sony cares to struggle like Nintendo is now with these game key cards, or even try to create a new UMD. It's like, nah, we're not doing that. It's digital. That's just kind of the way it is. And in some ways, it will help them to subsidize the cost of the system because as we've seen Sony, they've kind of walled everything off to where you have to go to the PlayStation Store to buy anything now. You can't go buy a card at Walmart for God of War, scratch off the code, and then you just go and redeem it. You get God of War. No, you can get PlayStation Store like currency and then buy God of War from Sony for the price they deem like required, necessary, and all that. So that I think that's gonna be a strategy here. It's just gonna be a digital system, which again makes me wonder how would that work? It like if at all, because they might just go, hey, you know what? You should have bought it digitally. So it really is hard to say. Although that tied in with PlayStation Plus. So if you have like PlayStation Plus Extra or Premium tier, you should get a bunch of games then naturally that goes through that collection. So the dual mics, again, I assume it's going to be very similar to the DualSense controller now, to where one sort of listens to the room to cut out any background noise and the other one just listens to you. So it's cool to have that at least built into the system. Although naturally you're going to run into some people who just don't know how to turn it off. And I'm wondering if they'll have a button for that, because there are sometimes going to lobbies, person probably has no idea they're talking into their controller the whole time, and you just hear them constantly just kind of talking to themselves, or other people in the room are just playing music. Okay, a diagram states that the USB-C port has video out capabilities. So I think back to the PSP with this one. I think there was something planned for the Vita, but it got shelved because it's the Vita, and Sony moved on from that pretty quick. But there was something for the PSP where you could plug in cables to the bottom of the handheld, and then you'd be able to plug it into a component, or even at AV, which was rough looking. But you could then play the PSP on your TV while still holding the PSP. You can make it work with controllers as well, but I think most of us just ran the cables and held the system right there in front of it. It was kind of cool just to see it on a big TV. You could legitimately put it on. Trying to think when this would have been 2012 or 2013. And I know I had one of those big projection TVs at one point, but then I also had like a standard sized TV with component out. It was just really cool to see the PSP. Yes, it was blown up and it was like a 480p image or something, but it was just new experience. It was fun. I like the idea of just having this as an addition because yes, you may get a cable. I almost wonder if there is a plan in place to where you could have like a dock release to, and then you sync up a DualSense controller. Now that then plays into how powerful would this thing be? Because at that point, you're talking about blowing it up to a much larger screen. The benefit of these handhelds, which, by the way, we go through here, 15 watt total board power, manufacturing plan for mid 2027, likely fall 2027. I mean, it would be 2 years out. That feels like something we'd start really hearing about here pretty soon if that was still the case. This is the thing, by the way, if this information, as they mentioned, being taken from 2023, that would be off. Like, plans are always in place for releasing this year, and then it ends up falling to the following year. It happens constantly when it comes down to putting all the pieces together and shipping a product like this. So I'm not saying it's impossible for fall 2027. I would be very surprised. And some are thinking 2028, maybe too soon, and we could end up in 2029 for this. I'm still thinking 2028 makes the most sense, and I feel like they don't have to launch any of their products anymore for the holidays, as we've seen Nintendo do some weird stuff, and it still worked for them. Gaming is just to the point where people are like, oh, cool, the new thing's out. I'll go buy it. It's kind of like Apple with iPhones or iPads or whatever. New phones. Oh, okay, yeah, I'll go buy it. What is it? It's May, sure. Who cares? I'll go buy it now. Now they go through some of the specifications here: 12 to 20 RDNA 5 compute units, 128-bit bus, LPDDR5X 7500 plus. My thing with this is he tries to break it down here to where it's 0.5 times a PS5 in terms of its rasterization performance. Ray tracing is expected to be higher than this, so that would make sense as you're just getting newer technology here with AMD, who is working to really continue to increase just the viability of using ray tracing in games. You don't really need it to be as powerful as a PS5 because the PS5 is attempting to get that 4K experience. And a lot of times, yes, it's through upscaling, but it's generally not upscaled from an image that's below 1080p. Sometimes it is. Okay, I'm not gonna say it's never like that, but most of the time you see some weird resolutions, 1260p or something. For this though, if it's on a handheld and it's not, I mean, it's 15 watts total board power, this isn't going to be a big thing then. I assume this is going to be, because it's also, I figure, not going to have like Joy-Con comparable. Like, it's not going to have that. It's going to be all one piece. I think this will actually be a pretty like sleek looking, or at least sized system. And with that in mind, the biggest part will be the screen, but maybe a 7-inch screen. Do you need 1080p? I feel like they probably will go for 1080p because they can. But when you start hearing that, it's like, well, they could upscale from 900p or something. You know, it doesn't always have to be native 1080p. That's the biggest advantage these handhelds have, is they are working off of a smaller screen. Now, when you blow it up to a larger screen through video out, who knows then, right? But the primary goal of this handheld, because yes, a PS6 would probably be coming out directly next to it, again, based on some of this information from internal documents, that would be the high-end device you would buy if you want that living room experience. The handheld would be kind of that companion system, although you could just buy it and just use that specifically. And I think that'd be really cool to see what Sony has planned for that handheld space. He mentions here that it should be able to beat the Xbox Ally X in performance, but it doesn't come off as a powerhouse. And yeah, it doesn't really need to come off as a powerhouse because there is that give and take, as I mentioned. 15 watt total board power. You can only do so much, right? But how much battery life do people want out of this thing? Because the Switch 2 gets 2-ish hours of battery life when you're playing Cyberpunk or something like that. And people go, ooh, that's not a lot. I feel like if you want this thing to be a powerhouse, you would also have to come to terms with it being fairly bulky and large, right? And then most likely having a battery life of 1.5 to 2 hours. And that's just kind of the way it is. I would prefer to have this thing, yes, be slightly weaker and lower powered, but then get 3 to 4, 5 hours battery life. Like there's potential there for them to aim more for that market than try to create the $1,000 handheld or something, which would be the other factor. What would be the price here? I still think Sony would release this system around that $500 to $600 mark. Again, 2027, 2028, years into the future. You saw how much prices have gone up in the last 4 years, 3 years. I mean, who knows where we'll be in 3 years from now. But I think like that $500 to $600 mark, somewhere in there. And it's heavy speculation because we're still far off from this to see how it would even materialize. But I'm picturing something that, yeah, it's kind of like that Vita successor, and that's very exciting to me to think that Sony would come back to the handheld space, because again, while we have all these other companies, your Lenovo's, your MSI's, right, your Valve's, and I think people do look to, because they've been in the handheld spaces for quite some time. They have a lot of history. They've shown they can create these systems. Well, that's Nintendo and Sony. I think that's just what people look towards. I mean, Sony sold 80 some odd million PSPs. Well, that was pretty good. So yeah, I'd be curious to see what they can come up with. And I think that is a company that Nintendo would pay more attention to than Valve or MSI or something, you know, get Asus or whatever, getting into the market for handhelds, which means, yes, I think Nintendo would be pushed a bit more by Sony. And that's something I would like to see, is core competition. Not necessarily, hey, Nintendo outsold the entirety of the PC gaming handheld space in less than 2 months with the Switch 2. It's like, oh, okay, well, there's not a lot of competition there. So if Sony shows up and is like, hey, we have a lot of those same games, and it has that more user-friendly setup, which is another big thing. You're not messing around with these menus and stuff that are all over the place, settings that, yes, enthusiasts like. I'm telling you now, the mainstream it looks at that and goes, yeah, that's not for me. I'm good with my Switch 1, or yeah, I guess my Vita or something. But that is a big thing there as well. It sounds crazy because it's like, oh, it's less flexibility, less freedom for your just gaming experience. But there are a lot of people just don't want to mess around with it and potentially do some damage to the device. I've been shocked before. I've gone through the struggles of retail and repair with electronics. There's some crazy stuff that happens there. Some things that make, hey, have you plugged it in, look like the most basic thing. So, yeah, wild stuff there. But Hey, I like what I'm seeing right now. I like the idea of Sony coming back, and just hearing more and more about some of the stuff in the background does start to make it feel a bit more real. But there's a lot of questions still about this thing. So I guess we'll see as we go along here towards a potential 2027 release, if more information gets out there that might even be a bit more updated than 2023 with an AMD presentation to Sony. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. With Sony, I mean, it seems like they're on their way back to the handheld market. What would you like to see most out of a device like this? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.